Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Diane Smith, and welcome to the 2024 presidential debate. Today, I will be your moderator. Welcome, President Joe Biden, former President Donald Trump, and first President, founding father, and commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, George Washington. Gentlemen, voters want to know, what specific actions and policies do you plan to implement? Well, during my presidency, I provided many a job for the African American, as you say these days. At my Mount Vernon estate, we gave them many jobs. They were blacksmiths, laundresses, seamstresses, cooks. They even raised our children. I suppose you could say they had quite the job security. Jobs for days, as they say. Nobody says that. After all, I did sign into law the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 during my presidency to ensure they always had reliable work. And now they're
taking black jobs and they're taking Hispanic jobs, and you haven't seen it yet, but you're going to see something that's going to be the worst in our history.
Okay. What say you, President Biden? Moving right along. The American people want to know, what do you plan to do to improve the welfare of our veterans?
First of all, our veterans and our soldiers can't stand this guy. They can't stand him. They think he's the worst commander-in-chief, if that's what you call him, that we've ever had. They can't stand him. So let's get that straight. And they like me more than just about any of them. And that's based on every single bit of information.
Look at this graph!
Did you ever hear any presidents say that I thought Hitler had some good ideas? After my son and daughter decided.
Who's Hitler? That concludes the 2024 presidential debate. Thank you for joining us. Good night. So let's get right into it. Today's topic, the controversial life of George Washington. This was actually a topic that was requested by a subscriber who really enjoyed my video on the controversial life of Henry Ford. And they wanted me to do a video on George Washington in a similar format. So thank you for watching. I really appreciate your support. To be honest, I really didn't know a lot about George Washington and the intricacies of his life. I mean, I always do a ton of research, but I did a ton of research on this man. But before doing research on this video, I heard some rumors about cherry trees and wooden teeth and, goofy shit like that, which by the way isn't true. His teeth were not made of wood. Washington did have different sets of dentures and partial dentures throughout his life, and more than likely, during that time period, they would have been made out of ivory, believe it or not, cow or horse teeth, and sometimes even human teeth. Yeah, that's right, folks. People were walking around with cow teeth in their mouth and other people's teeth and shit. That's some nasty work. But you gotta do what you gotta do when you're living in colonial America.
Donkey teeth.
Donkey teeth.
Straight out a donkey's mouth. You know what? It. Any animal tooth will do.
And there's actually some theories out there that some of his teeth were the teeth of enslaved people that he purchased from dentists. But I'm gonna throw out a picture here so you can have a look-see yourself. These were actually a set of George Washington's teeth. Look at those beauties.
I'll tell you what, that looks fucking awful, innit?
I actually contemplated using some of that teeth darkening stuff for the video. I did it for my pirate video. I think I went far enough this time. And by the way, just a FYI, I do not think that this is how George Washington presented himself. This is just me adding a persona to George Washington for the bit, for the skit. This is my George Washington.
That is not correct. Because according to the encyclopedia of...
But yeah, those teeth, it goes without saying, what a horrible time to be alive. Any time before now, even 40 years ago, what a horrible time to be alive, but especially during Washington's time period, because this man had dental issues starting at the age of 13. Very similar to myself. I've had dental issues damn near my whole life. So if I was living during this period, I already know I'd be gumming it, okay? I'm not putting horse shit, cow shit, nothing, okay? we're gumming it. But anyway, I'm going off topic. This is a video about George Washington and some of the not so savory things that he did. And that's what you're here for, I'm assuming. So let's get into it. Oh, but one more thing. If you like this here video, go ahead and give it the old like and subscribe. Appreciate the support. George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732 in Westmoreland, Virginia, and he would die in 1799 at the age of 67. He was the general and commander-in-chief of the colonial armies in the American Revolutionary War, a founding father, and the first president of the United States. In 1775, he was appointed commander of the Continental Army, and he played a very big role in leading American forces to victory against the British. And after becoming the first president of the United States, his time in office would last from 1789 to 1797. So he served 2 terms and left office at the age of 65. By the way, just based on the current situation in the US concerning the presidential debate, did you know that the average age of a US president when they're inaugurated is 55? Oh, and the youngest was Theodore Roosevelt at the young, spry age of 42. Take a wild guess who the oldest is. Ta-da! Joe Biden was 78 during his inauguration, and he's now 81, and he's running again. I think that we can all safely say as a collective, what the is going on? Now, during Washington's presidency, he set a lot of the traditions that future presidents would take part in. We have Washington to thank for the 2-term maximum that a president can hold office. He also established the tradition of the inaugural address, the State of the Union address, the farewell address, and the creation of the presidential cabinet. He really liked his addresses, clearly. Indigenous tribes played a major role during the American Revolution, even though their involvement isn't really talked about much. I mean, think about it. They were in a very precarious and terrifying situation where they had to navigate the very dangerous world of European imperial powers competing for power and land throughout North America. Their land, by the way. And so indigenous tribes were forced to pick a side between the loyalists, those who remained loyal to the British monarchy, and the patriots, colonists who supported the American Revolution. Some tribes tried to find a way to remain as neutral as possible, but even that approach didn't prevent tribes from being met with violence and brutality from both sides. During George Washington's lifetime, he was given the moniker Town Destroyer amongst indigenous tribes, specifically the Iroquois. Let's just say his relationship with indigenous tribes was shit. It was poo-poo. In 1779, Washington gave the order to destroy over 40 Iroquois villages in New York during the Revolutionary War. Seneca Chief Kaiiontwa'kon, which I apologize if I am mispronouncing his name, is quoted telling Washington, "When your army entered the country of the Six Nations, we called you Town Destroyer. And to this day, when your name is heard, our women look behind them and turn pale, and our children cling close to the necks of their mothers." During what is known as the Sullivan-Clinton Expedition in 1779, Washington ordered Major General John Sullivan to destroy Iroquois settlements in response to attacks led by the Iroquois and British loyalists the previous year. This was a mission with the goal of the complete annihilation of these people. Washington instructed Sullivan to destroy as many of their settlements as possible, and this also included destroying their crops, which of course prevents them from being able to grow food. And Sullivan was also instructed to take in as many prisoners as possible. And as a result of Washington's orders, at least 40 Iroquois settlements were decimated. And in addition to that, Washington also instructed Sullivan to disregard any attempts at peace by the Iroquois people. It said that Washington instructed the troops not to essay any of the women because, quote, savages didn't commit such acts against women prisoners.
Bruh. Very considerate, very approachable, very demure.
However, there are accounts from some Iroquois traditions that report soldiers during the campaign committing many atrocities. And this included essaying their women, infants, and taking young women hostage to be essayed by American soldiers and then put to death. None of these events were documented on the American side. And honestly, why would they? It's very unfortunate because oftentimes our history is founded on the Western world's version of events. Actually, probably like all the time, pretty much, damn near. So it's not surprising that the Iroquois' retelling of events, their history is different from what the Americans document is transpiring during this very horrific time. Washington's relationship with slavery was a complicated one. To no one's surprise, I'm sure, he was a supporter of slavery, and he enslaved many a person. And he's actually one of 8 American presidents who had enslaved people during their presidency. So he's not the only one. And again, during his presidency. So there are probably more out there who had enslaved people outside of their presidency period. But he started young. Washington became an enslaver at the young, ripe age of 11 when his father passed away in 1743. Can you imagine being 11 years old and enslaving people, like inheriting people?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
From his father's death, Washington inherited his family's 200-acre family farm near Fredericksburg, Virginia, plus 10 enslaved people. But it didn't stop there. Over time, his slave holdings increased, adding at least 8 more enslaved people a few years later, and then 4 men, and then 2 women, and then a child in 1755. It did not stop there, people, okay? After he married his wife, Martha Dandridge Custis, in 1759, she brought with her 84 more enslaved people from her previous marriage. So this increased number of enslaved people being tied to George Washington's estate, it was like over the course of some years. By the time of Washington's death, they had accumulated 317 enslaved people. And of the 317 enslaved individuals, 153 were enslaved under his wife's ex-husband's estate. And then an estimated 123 were enslaved under Washington's. And then the remainder were leased. You heard right, they were leased. Because legally, enslaved people were property and they were treated as such. One day, I really want to do a video on the intricacies of chattel slavery, especially from an economic perspective in relation to the human aspect, the way it affected people who were enslaved, because it's just wild. Like, the laws that they created around slavery will blow your mind. But anyway, you weren't just some everyday Joe Schmo with 300 enslaved people tied to your estate. Over 300 people was considered a lot. Just to purchase one enslaved person was seen as a status symbol. That was the goal for a lot of poor white folks back then. So to have that many enslaved people tied to your estate at that time was crazy. But I will say this though, Thomas Jefferson puts that man to shame. I mean, he enslaved over 600 people. This guy was something else. And he had the nerve to publicly denounce slavery.
Denial is a river in Egypt.
I remember some years ago, me and my partner, we visited the Monticello plantation. And for those of you who don't know what Monticello is, it was Thomas Jefferson's plantation. And that visit was one of the most gut-wrenching historical sites I had ever been to in my life, and probably still is today. And if you've never been there before, I remember there was this one room that we went into, and it was like a room where he would have his guests, you know, they would come, he would sit, talk to them. He would have an enslaved person serve, you know, drinks, cigars, whatever, using this like hidden dumbwaiter device in the room, so that all of a sudden your drink would just appear. You'd like open this little area and boom, you would never see this person giving you or serving you this alcoholic beverage or whatever they were asked to bring. So this was essentially Jefferson's attempt at hiding or preventing the guests from being able to see the enslaved person. There was also, I remember, these little like areas where only enslaved people would walk through, where they would be hidden, where they would get their work done, where people wouldn't see them. So the hypocrisy of Thomas Jefferson is just, it's something else. The most disturbing part was a cemetery. There are 2 cemeteries on that property. One was for the Jefferson family. There's, you know, tombstones everywhere. It looks like a regular schmegular, you know, little cemetery. But then there was also another cemetery, and I refer to it as a cemetery very lightly, because this plot of land held the bodies of enslaved men, women, and children that were tied to the Monticello plantation, that were born, lived, and died on that plantation. And there were no tombstones. There was nothing. It consisted of a plot, a patch of land full of unmarked graves. Oh my God, it was a lot. That's all I can say. Like, I can't even put it into words how I felt, how other people felt. All I felt was sadness and anger. But yeah, this just reminded me of that experience. And yeah, one day I will have to do a video on Thomas Jefferson. Now that man has a controversial past. But anyway, while I was doing my research on old Georgie boy, I was curious to know, on average, how many enslaved people white families enslaved to their properties, considering the number that Washington and Jefferson had enslaved. And after doing some digging, I came across government census information that documents this info. And in Washington's home state, Virginia, in the year 1782, the average number was 8. So acquiring that number was, like I've already said a million times, super rare. But just knowing like what the average was really puts it into perspective. 8 versus 317 versus over 600 for Jefferson. And the reason for that number being so low has nothing to do with people having a sense of morality, you know, realizing that slavery is wrong. No, it's because they were so damn expensive. Purchasing a human was not cheap. Now, although towards the later years of Washington's life, he had expressed some level of distaste for slavery, he was still making moves like someone who supported slavery. Because during his time in office, he signed the Fugitive Slave Act. And this act made it a federal crime to assist enslaved people who escaped slavery or to interfere with their capture. So you can't even help anyone without getting in trouble. You are now risking your well-being if you help someone escape from slavery. And the thing that really took this act up an extra notch when it comes to fucked upness is that it applied everywhere through the US, slave state or not. They did not give a shit about what your local climate was about slavery or what your local laws, whatever. This superseded it. And Washington signing this act into law will not come to a surprise to you when I share with you the story of Oney Judge. Many enslaved people living at Washington's Mount Vernon property took opportunities to escape captivity. During the American Revolutionary War, 17 people fled their enslavement from Washington and his wife, and of those people was a young woman named Oney Judge. Judge would go on to evade capture for the rest of her life. However, this led to what I would describe as an obsession on Washington's part, an obsession to capture Judge. He would go on to relentlessly search for Judge everywhere, maybe even to the depths of Helheim. I don't know. I do know that this man was determined to recapture and re-enslave this young woman. Judge was born on the Mount Vernon property in the year 1774, and she was described as a, quote, mulatto girl, much freckled and almost white. Judge began working in the Washington household at the age of 10, and she became Washington's wife's personal maid. Because Judge's mother was enslaved to Martha Washington's late husband's estate, she was also enslaved under that estate. So just in case that sounds confusing, her mother, her siblings, they were not enslaved under Washington's estate. They were enslaved under Martha, but really directly her late husband's estate. So anyway, she was enslaved under Martha, not Washington. But yeah, so like I said, the laws of slavery were something else. Bruh. So anyway, here was the deal. Here was the situation, right? So upon Martha's passing, her heirs would inherit Judge and her family. Martha had planned to give Judge to her granddaughter, whose name was Elizabeth Park Curtis Law. That's a super freaking long name. But yeah, she had planned to give Judge to her granddaughter as a wedding gift. How kind. Word on the curb was that her granddaughter,
A piece of shit.
And so when Judge caught wind of Martha's plans, she booked it. On the evening of May 21st, 1796, Judge waited for the Washingtons to sit down for dinner, and then like a boss, she walked out of the president's house in Philadelphia. Following Judge's great escape, Washington posted ads everywhere to recapture her, and the reward for her capture was a whopping $10. Now, don't get it twisted. This isn't $10 in today's money. That would have been anywhere from $300 to $400. And Here's one of the ads. Absconded from the household of the President of the United States, Oney Judge, a light mulatto girl, much freckled, with very black eyes and bushy black hair. She is of middle stature, but slender and delicately made, about 20 years of age. She has many changes of very good clothes of all sorts, but they are not sufficiently recollected to describe. As time went on, George Washington's determination to capture Judge amplified. And like I already said, Judge was enslaved under Martha's late husband's estate, and because of this, Washington was responsible for reimbursing the estate if she was not found. During my research, there was something that I found to be so laughable, like the level of delusion of these people. Apparently, Washington was documented as saying he could not fathom why Judge would flee. Quote, "She was brought up and treated more like a child than a servant." And it's because of this, Washington believed that the only reason why Judge would flee is that she was seduced by a Frenchman.
Oui.
You heard right, folks. Oddly specific, by the way. What the a Frenchman? Why a Frenchman? But yeah, you know, it couldn't have anything to do with, I don't know, wanting to be free. Judge would go on to flee to New Hampshire, and just after a few months, she was recognized by a friend of one of Martha Washington's granddaughters. Them goddamn granddaughters, bruh. This big mouth flapping her damn gums. It made its way to Washington. So then Washington would go on to hire this guy named Joseph Whipple, which, by the way, you can't tell me that this man was not teased when he was a kid with that name. So he hired Whipple to bring Judge back to him. When Whipple found Judge, he tried to get her to board a ship back to Philadelphia. And in response to this, Judge told him the only way she would return to Washington was if he promised to free her upon his and Martha's deaths. Now, at this point, it's like 1796, and Washington would actually die in a couple of years. So maybe she figured, hey, this guy, he's not long for this world. Probably his wife neither. It is the 18th century after all, so. But here's the kicker. In response to Judge's proposal, Washington was not amused at all. He was having none of it. In fact, he pretty much told her to kick rocks. And here's where the delusion comes back again. He had the nerve to say that there were other enslaved people under his estate that were more deserving of being set free than her due to her unfaithfulness.
Shut the hell up.
Because, you know, all the other people you've enslaved are there out of sheer loyalty, sir. You know what I find to be very insufferable? And I've seen this commented on some of my videos in the past. I find it insufferable when people use the excuse, oh, it was a different time, so XYZ person acted according to that period. I'm gonna say this one time. I don't care how normalized chattel slavery was to people in colonial America. I don't care. Bruh, you are delusional if you truly believe that people enslaved on your property were out there out of the sheer principle of faithfulness and duty. It goes beyond Delulu. And the other reason why I find this line of thinking flawed when it comes to it was a different time excuse is that there were always people who existed in these periods who didn't embrace these barbaric actions. Case in point, Thomas Paine. He was an abolitionist. He did not purchase people. And he was also a founding father, just like Thomas Jefferson, just like George Washington. He knew it was wrong. He knew it was f***ed up. Jefferson also knew it was f***ed up because he was trying to hide the fact that he had over 600 something slaves from time to time. And Washington knew it was bad because closer towards the end of his life, he expressed that he knew that it was, he was like, it should end at some point, but just not now, just not while I'm benefiting off of it. So miss me with the bullshit. I'm never going to apply a completely contemporary lens to the past. Like, that's crazy, of course, but I'm also not going to pretend like empathy didn't exist throughout all of human history. So putting a pin in it right there, a little sticky note for y'all to see in case anybody is stupid enough to use that excuse. You can reference it right up in that corner. Thank you. But anyway, I just found that whole situation just comical. Washington's response to Judge leaving. He would even go on to, in his final year, attempt one last time, for old time's sake, to capture her. And he failed. Oney would go on to get married. She'd give birth to 2 children, and unfortunately, she would outlive them both, including her husband. But despite these unfortunate events in her life, she said that she was happy. She lived a very happy life. And even after leaving her family behind at the Mount Vernon plantation, she had no regrets, because she was free. Washington would go on to promise in his will to free all of those enslaved upon his wife's death. However, Martha would go on to free those enslaved under Washington's estate a little early, actually just a year after her husband's death. And it's suspected that she did this because she was getting a little nervous about all these people walking around waiting for her to kick the bucket. Unfortunately for the enslaved people that fell under Martha's late husband's estate, by law, their enslavement reverted back to his estate and a trust for her grandchildren. And so those enslaved under her late husband's estate would remain enslaved until their deaths or the dissolution of the estate. Well, that's George Washington. I'm sure there's more out there, but I didn't want this video to be super long. It's been a while since I've uploaded a lot of life shit, and I wanted to get something out there quickly, so I really hope you enjoyed this video. I don't like to linger, so thanks for watching. Bye.